We are not sure, but we have traffic info now.
On November 17, 1986, Japan Airlines Flight 1628 took off on what was a routine cargo mission. On board was a veteran crew, led by Captain Kenju Terauchi. But everything was about to change. The appearance of strange luminous objects, moving with capabilities far beyond any known human technology, not only threatened the safety of the massive Boeing 747, but also challenged all of humanity's understanding of physics and aerospace. Elmendorf Air Force Base confirmed that an unidentified object was chasing the aircraft, moving at terrifying speeds and playing tag with JAL 1628. This evidence was so compelling that an urgent meeting was convened in Washington, D.C., with the presence of the CIA, the FBI, and even advisors to President Reagan.
We were never here.
So what truly happened in the Alaskan sky that night? Did the crew encounter an intelligent extraterrestrial force, or was this merely a collective hallucination by veteran pilots? On November 17, 1986, Japan Airlines Flight 1628 lifted into the skies as just another routine cargo mission, yet within hours it would become the center of one of the most puzzling aviation encounters ever recorded. The Boeing 747-200F carried a load of French wine from Paris, stopping in Reykjavik before heading toward Anchorage, Alaska, where it would refuel on its long journey to Tokyo. In command of the massive aircraft was Captain Kenju Terauchi, a man with more than 10,000 hours of flying time and the background of a former fighter pilot. To many, his reputation as a disciplined aviator gave weight to everything he reported that night. Beside him sat First Officer Takanori Tamafuji and Flight Engineer Yoshio Tsukuba, both equally experienced and focused on navigating one of the busiest air corridors in the northern skies. The scene outside their cockpit was dramatic. Twilight was falling over Alaska, and the sun had slipped just below the horizon. The sky mixed fading blue with bands of orange light, creating conditions that could play tricks on the eyes but also offered long stretches of clear visibility. High above the snowy landscape at 35,000 feet, the 747 pushed forward at cruising speed, surrounded only by the silence of the upper atmosphere. To the crew, it felt like another predictable crossing, one they had performed many times before without incident. What none of them expected was that this routine flight would soon change into a mystery that challenged both science and government, placing Captain Terauchi at the center of a storm that still sparks debate today. But what exactly did the crew first see in that sky, and how did it turn a standard flight into an extraordinary case? The first sign that something was wrong came as Captain Terauchi glanced out of the left window. Far below his altitude, perhaps 2,000 feet lower, two glowing objects seemed to pace the aircraft. At first, he thought they might be military planes, the kind that sometimes appeared in remote skies, but their movement was unusual. They hovered too steadily in the fading twilight, staying close enough to catch his eye without revealing a clear shape. As the crew watched, the objects drew nearer. They were no longer distant lights lost in the horizon, but shapes that appeared to pulse with energy. Each one flickered with strobes of yellow and white, bright enough to reflect against the glass of the cockpit. The captain felt a sensation that unsettled him even more, the impression of heat. It was as if the lights radiated warmth through the thin shell of the 747, a detail he would later emphasize in his report. Suddenly, the two objects leapt forward. In less than a heartbeat, they crossed the dark sky and positioned themselves directly in front of the cargo jet. Now they were only about 500 feet ahead, shining with an intensity that filled the cockpit with light. For 3 to 7 seconds, the crew sat frozen, their instruments glowing brighter than usual, while the mysterious objects seemed to hover with impossible control. Then, as abruptly as they had appeared, the glare dimmed, and the forms shrank into smaller circles of light that floated level with the plane. The crew tried to understand what they were seeing. The objects looked almost mechanical, as if they had bodies that sparked with occasional streams of fire like glowing charcoal. Their outlines suggested a size comparable to a DC-8 fuselage, smaller than their 747, but still formidable at such close range. First Officer Tamafuji and Engineer Tsukuba later admitted they could not be sure of any definite structure, but they confirmed the strange lights moved in a way no star or planet could. Terauchi's instincts told him this was no ordinary phenomenon. He had flown thousands of hours in combat aircraft and commercial jets, and he knew how to recognize reflections, stars, or even the glint of another airplane. Nothing in his experience explained how these objects had appeared so close to a plane moving at over 560 miles per hour, then maintained perfect formation without any visible wings or engines. To him, it seemed impossible for human technology to behave like this. The lights displayed no hostile behavior. They maintained formation, matching the 747's speed and course. Despite the absence of turbulence or unusual sounds, the crew's apprehension increased. They were witnessing a phenomenon that defied their understanding and control. If the crew could see the object so clearly, why was there no confirmation from the ground, and what role would radar play in this unfolding mystery? The next step for the crew was to seek confirmation from the ground. Captain Terauchi contacted Anchorage Air Route Traffic Control, asking if any other aircraft were near their position. The response was calm and clear. No traffic was detected, and their radar screens showed only Flight 1628. For the men in the cockpit, that answer was unsettling. They could see the lights as plain as day, yet the radar on the ground denied their presence. Determined to get more information, Terauchi adjusted the Boeing's weather radar. He set the range to 25 nautical miles and scanned the horizon. A faint green echo appeared about 8 miles away, at the same angle where the strange lights floated. This was not a strong red return that would suggest a thunderstorm or solid object, but it was enough to prove that something unusual was there. The crew reported this finding back to Anchorage, but the controllers still could not locate any secondary signal from a transponder. Meanwhile, military radar at Elmendorf Air Force Base picked up something different. Their systems showed a primary blip that faded in and out, trailing behind the Japanese cargo plane. To them, it looked like an object was shadowing the 747, even if it was not sending back a signal. Anchorage passed this information to Terauchi, confirming that at least one radar operator believed something was following his flight. The contradictions deepened the mystery. Civilian radar saw nothing. The plane's own system showed a faint but real return. Military radar suggested a target that appeared and vanished like a ghost. For investigators, these layers of conflicting data later became one of the most important pieces of the case, since they revealed that not all instruments were speaking the same truth. Inside the cockpit, the confusion grew heavier. If the lights were truly physical objects, they should have left a stronger radar trace. If they were illusions, why did both the captain and his crew describe them in such detail? And if the military had evidence, why did the civilian controllers deny it? The more the crew tried to find a logical explanation, the more impossible the situation became. For Captain Terauchi, the evidence pointed to one conclusion. He believed he was being tracked by something advanced, and the failure of radar only proved that whatever it was did not want to be identified. The silence from Anchorage left the crew alone with their fear, while the faint green echo on their own screen reminded them that they were not imagining things. If radar could not give them clear answers, The only option left was to change course and test whether the lights would follow. But would a simple maneuver be enough to escape, or would it reveal that the mysterious objects were far more capable than anyone expected? When it became clear that radar could not solve the mystery, Captain Terauchi made the only choice that seemed possible. He asked for a change of course. Anchorage cleared him to turn west toward a new heading of 240 degrees. The 747 responded smoothly, dropping from 35,000 feet down to 31,000 in hopes of breaking away from the lights. Yet when the crew looked outside, the glowing objects were still there, moving as if attached to their path. The evasive maneuver had failed, and the unsettling truth settled in. They were being followed. Anchorage grew more concerned and proposed something far more serious. Controllers suggested calling in military support from nearby Elmendorf Air Force Base. If fighters were scrambled, they might intercept the mysterious craft and provide answers, but Terauchi hesitated. The idea of armed jets confronting the objects triggered memories of a well-known tragedy from 1948 when Captain Thomas Mantell died while chasing a supposed UFO. That caution weighed heavily on him, and he declined the offer, unwilling to risk sparking a conflict with an unknown force. Instead, Anchorage decided to involve other civilian aircraft. A United Airlines passenger jet, Flight 69, was asked to come closer and report what they saw. Its pilots scanned the skies but found only the silhouette of JAL 1628 against the fading light. They saw no strange ships, no glowing thrusters, nothing that matched the frantic descriptions from Terauchi's crew. At nearly the same time, a U.S. Air Force C-130 cargo plane flew nearby. Its crew also confirmed that while the Japanese 747 was visible, no other object could be found. Such contradictions later became a central point for skeptics, but in the moment, they only deepened the crew's fear. The pursuit stretched on for nearly 50 minutes. Every turn, every descent seemed to leave the lights untouched. Terauchi's voice carried more tension with each call to Anchorage, and the other men in the cockpit admitted later that they felt powerless. The sheer size of the supposed mothership, which Terauchi claimed was larger than 2 aircraft carriers, only added to the weight of the situation. By the time the lights finally vanished, the crew had no answers. The silence left behind was almost as unnerving as the chase itself. For investigators, the central question became unavoidable. If the UFOs were truly there, why could only one cockpit see them while others saw nothing? And when Flight 1628 touched down in Anchorage, what would the captain reveal? And how would his report ignite one of the most controversial investigations in aviation history? The 747 rolled safely onto the runway, carrying not only its cargo of French wine, but also a story that would spread around the world. For Captain Terauchi and his crew, the relief of landing was mixed with the weight of what they had witnessed. They knew that their account would challenge both science and authority. Soon after parking the aircraft, the crew was debriefed by officials from the Federal Aviation Administration. Each man was asked to explain exactly what he saw, and while their words differed in detail, they all agreed on one fact: something unknown had flown near their plane. Terauchi was the most outspoken. In his written report, he described 2 smaller craft and 1 massive mothership that had loomed ahead of them, sometimes so close that the cockpit glowed with light. He even compared its size to 2 aircraft carriers placed end to end, a scale that no known machine could match. The FAA treated the testimony with caution. On the other hand, they had no clear radar confirmation that could be shown to the public. For investigators, the contradiction made the case both fascinating and dangerous. If they accepted the report as true, it would mean admitting that a mysterious craft had entered American airspace undetected. If they dismissed it, they risked silencing a veteran pilot whose career was built on discipline and accuracy. Inside Japan Airlines, the reaction was swift. While Terauchi's colleagues respected his skill, the company feared embarrassment. Media interest exploded, and the idea of a UFO shadowing a commercial aircraft threatened to stain their reputation. To contain the damage, JAL quietly removed Terauchi from flying duties and reassigned him to a desk job. For a man who had spent his life in the cockpit, it was a heavy blow, one that lasted several years before he was finally allowed to fly again. The report itself became a lightning rod. UFO enthusiasts hailed it as one of the clearest pilot accounts ever recorded, proof that something beyond human technology was in the skies. Skeptics, however, pointed out that the co-pilot and flight engineer had not described the same mothership in such dramatic terms. They argued that Terauchi was exaggerating, possibly influenced by his personal belief in extraterrestrial life. The landing of Flight 1628 marked the moment when the case shifted from a private nightmare in the sky to a public controversy on the ground. What began as a strange encounter was now a matter for officials, journalists, and even intelligence agencies. But how did this case, born in the frozen skies of Alaska, reach the highest offices of the US government, and why were men from the CIA and the FBI suddenly interested in a cargo flight's report? Within days of the incident, the Federal Aviation Administration escalated the case far beyond a routine debriefing. John Callahan, then the FAA's Division Chief of Accidents and Investigations, received an urgent call from Alaska. The message was simple but alarming. They had a problem that could not be explained, and the media was already circling. Callahan requested every tape, radar disc, and transcript from Anchorage and demanded they be flown overnight to his office in Washington, D.C. When the data arrived, Callahan and his team recreated the entire event. They synchronized the radar recordings with the radio transmissions between Anchorage Control, the Air Force at Elmendorf, and Captain Terauchi. The results were startling. The civilian radar did not show the UFOs, but the military system revealed a target that seemed to maneuver at extraordinary speeds around the Japanese 747. In Callahan's words, the objects looked like they were playing tag with the cargo plane. Soon after, Callahan was told to present the findings in a high-level meeting. Representatives from the CIA, the FBI, and even President Reagan's scientific advisory team filled the room. Boxes of data were stacked against the walls, and every piece of evidence was laid out for review. As the radar blips and audio tapes were played, the atmosphere grew tense. Some officials whispered that this might be the first time a UFO had been tracked on radar for such a long period. But the excitement did not last. At the end of the briefing, the mood shifted. According to Callahan, the officials instructed everyone present to forget what they had seen. This never happened, they were told. The case was sealed, the meeting erased from official memory, and the public explanation would be far more ordinary. For Callahan, the order made no sense. If the objects were only illusions, why gather the nation's top intelligence agencies? If they were real, why bury the evidence instead of admitting the truth? The mystery was no longer just about lights in the sky, it had become a question of trust between government and citizens. So what explanation would the FAA later give to the press, and how would skeptics try to dismantle the story that seemed too incredible to believe? 3 months after the strange encounter, the FAA finally addressed the growing public curiosity. On March 5, 1987, a press conference was held to reveal the agency's official findings. The expectation was high because the story had already spread worldwide, and many believed the government would confirm what the pilots had risked their reputations to report. Instead, the announcement was a sharp reversal. The FAA spokesman explained that what radar operators first thought was an unknown craft had been reinterpreted as a split image of the Japan Airlines 747. According to the statement, this technical glitch made it seem as though there were two targets when only one aircraft was actually present. The spokesman admitted that the descriptions from the crew were detailed, but insisted that the agency had no evidence to support the existence of another object. In one stroke, the UFO was downgraded from a potential national security threat to a simple radar error. Skeptics quickly took advantage of this shift. Writers like Philip Klass and Robert Schieffer argued that Captain Terauchi was unreliable, pointing out that he had reported several UFO sightings in the past. They noted that the co-pilot and flight engineer had not described a giant mothership, only lights, which made Terauchi's claims seem exaggerated. Astronomers added fuel by suggesting that the bright planets Jupiter and Mars were in the same area that night, perfectly placed to be mistaken for glowing objects. To them, the entire story was nothing more than an illusion created by a tired pilot's eyes. These explanations gained ground because they seemed rational, yet they left important questions unanswered. How could an experienced aviator confuse stars for a massive structure that appeared to radiate heat? Why did military radar at Elmendorf Air Force Base detect a faint target that matched the plane's movements if nothing unusual was there? And why had high-level officials taken the case seriously enough to call in the CIA and FBI if the answer was as simple as planets and ice crystals? For the public, the denial only deepened the mystery. Officially, the case was closed, but unofficially, it was still very much alive. The contradiction between the captain's words and the government statement created a gap that no one could fully close. And as if to prove that the skies of Alaska were far from ordinary, two more sightings would follow in quick succession, adding fuel to a fire that was already burning. Even after the FAA's denial, the skies over Alaska refused to stay quiet. Only weeks after Flight 1628's encounter, two more incidents reignited the debate. On January 29, 1987, an Alaska Airlines jet reported strange lights moving in ways that did not match any known aircraft. The following day, a U.S. Air Force KC-135 refueling plane experienced a similar event, with crew members describing glowing objects that appeared and disappeared without explanation. For many observers, these back-to-back sightings suggested that something unusual was truly active in the region. If multiple crews flying different missions could describe similar anomalies, then perhaps the JAL captain had not been mistaken after all. The media seized on the pattern, calling it an Alaska UFO wave. Newspapers and television networks framed the frozen skies as a stage for unexplained visitors, and once again, the public's imagination raced ahead of official explanations. At the same time, the backlash against Terauchi grew stronger. Skeptics pointed to inconsistencies between his original radio calls and later interviews, arguing that he had exaggerated his account. Critics also emphasized that even within Terauchi's cockpit, the descriptions did not fully match. The first officer and flight engineer reported lights, but they did not confirm the massive mothership that the captain insisted he had seen. Despite these attacks, the case refused to disappear. John Callahan continued to speak about the secret meeting in Washington, insisting that government officials had privately admitted the radar data was historic. UFO researchers kept Flight 1628 at the top of their lists, citing it as rare evidence where visual sightings and radar records seem to overlap. For them, the combination of pilot testimony, military interest, and sudden government silence was too important to ignore. By the late 1980s, the JAL encounter had become a cornerstone of modern UFO history, standing as both proof and puzzle. To believers, it was a glimpse into contact with something beyond Earth. To skeptics, it was a cautionary tale about human error and perception. Yet the central mystery remained untouched. If nothing unusual had happened, why did the story continue to spark fear, fascination, and secrecy decades later? And if this case could not be closed after so much debate, what lesson does it leave about how we handle the unknown? Decades later, the JAL Flight 1628 incident remains a captivating enigma, a perfect storm of credible testimony, conflicting data, and government secrecy. It stands as a profound lesson in how we confront the unexplained. The official file may be closed, but the core questions are louder than ever. How does a veteran pilot mistake planets for a structured, heat-radiating craft that evades radar one moment and is confirmed by it the next? Why silence a story with such high-level force if it was merely an illusion? This case teaches us that the unknown is often met not with curiosity, but with containment. The true legacy of that Alaskan night is not a definitive answer, but a permanent question mark in the sky, reminding us that some mysteries refuse to be solved, challenging our perception of reality and the transparency of the institutions meant to protect us.